Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our GenAI talks, hosted by NASDAQ and AWS as part of this fantastic New York Tech Week. Woo! My name is Noy Levinson, and I'm excited to be your moderator for today's event. I lead the AWS Startups and Venture Capital team in New York, and I'm part of a global group of startup experts who have the privilege of working closely with some of the best startups and fastest growing companies in the world. Many of these companies are here with us today on stage or with us in the room. Thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of NASDAQ and AWS, we would like also to thank our sponsors for this event, KPMG and Oric, making this event happen. Thank you so much. So we have a packed agenda for you with fantastic content and a great lineup of speakers. So over the next hour, you will hear speakers from AWS, NASDAQ, AWS executives, and top 4 GenAI visionary startups that really representing the forefront of innovation. So without further ado, and to kick things off, I would like to invite the one and only Moran Mazik, Capital Markets Leader at AWS, and right after Jeff Thomas, EVP and Head of Corporate Platform at NASDAQ. Moran, please join us to stage, please.
Thank you, Noy. Okay, can you hear me? So I represent AWS Global Financial Services. And at AWS, we run the relationship. We work with the largest financial services companies in the world, including NASDAQ. And we've been working with NASDAQ for over a decade now. And as we work with NASDAQ daily, we observe a technology company that has innovation in its DNA. And that's what NASDAQ brings to the relationship with us, with their partners, and with their customers. And at AWS, my team has been fortunate enough to work alongside NASDAQ as we continue pioneering new solutions, such as the first option markets in the cloud on AWS Outpost, announced by actually NASDAQ CEO Adina Friedman at our reInvent. And through today with industry-leading products, NASDAQ products that you're going to hear about running on AWS GenAI solutions. So thank you, NASDAQ, for your deep engagement with the AWS services team and ongoing feedback loop with our products and engineering teams. And lastly, I'm going to talk about our AWS partner team. And we've been collaborating with them and with NASDAQ in order to deepen NASDAQ relationship with our startup partners, both pre and post IPO, where NASDAQ is providing guidance and support for these companies. This is why the NASDAQ office is such a great location for this event today. So thank you again, NASDAQ, for your partnership with AWS and the startup ecosystem and for hosting us here today. And now I want to call on stage Jeff Thomas, NASDAQ Executive Vice President, Corporate Platforms.
Thanks, Brian. Well, everybody, welcome to NASDAQ. I hope if this is your first time, you're having an amazing experience, and we hope to host all of you here one day when your companies go public. As Brian mentioned, I'm Jeff Thomas. I'm EVP of Corporate Platforms at NASDAQ. So I oversee a lot of the businesses that we're best known for, including the listings team. We also have 10,000 corporate clients around the globe that we help with investor relations, corporate governance, and ESG reporting. But NASDAQ is so much more. Since our CEO, Adina Friedman, took over in 2017, we've been on a journey to become the trusted fabric of the financial ecosystem. We do so much more than you would ever imagine. We power over 130 other exchanges with our technology. We have anti-financial crime to help banks catch criminals. And with our acquisition last year of Adenza, we now power trade management and risk reporting and regulatory reporting solutions for the largest financial institutions in the world. So what is common across all of these different lines of businesses? They're all being empowered and disruptive through generative AI. So AWS has been a phenomenal partner. As we started this journey over 10 years ago to move our markets to the cloud, that has set us up from a technology base to be ready to capture the generative AI revolution. And so my partner in crime, Andrew Ruan, who's one of our senior technology leaders, will be walking you through some real-life examples at the end of the program to help explain how NASDAQ is using generative AI technology, both in our products and to optimize on our business. So it is a truly incredible and exciting time to be working at NASDAQ. We feel privileged to have all of you who are leading the generative AI revolution here today at what we hope is going to be one of the marquee events during Tech Week here in New York. So without further ado, I want to turn over and start off with the content. So John, want to come on up? Or Noi, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and Moran as well for the great, inspiring introduction. And definitely, it's going to be one of the highlights of Tech Week, I can assure you. So without further ado, let's start with our first keynote for today. I would like to welcome to stage our AWS VP Go-to-Market for Products and Services, John Jones. And he's going to deep dive and have a fireside chat with Kate Jensen, Head of Revenue in Anthropic. And before that, John will set the stage to kind of come up with the overall strategy of AWS and where we are going in this huge shift around the GenAI. John, welcome.
Okay, thank you, Noi. I'm going to hand this off. Actually, do you have one? Okay. Jeff, thank you for the partnership. Thank you for the warm remarks and the introduction. It's been a really amazing partnership over the years across a lot of technology fronts. GenAI is one of them. Super excited that Kate's going to join me here in just a minute. And I was actually asked to spend maybe 3 to 5 minutes on why GenAI, why now? And this is one of the questions that we at AWS and I actually get asked most often as I'm meeting with customers and investors. And there are a few things that are happening, 2 in particular, that are leading to this exponential breakthrough. One of these is that if you look at what an AI model is, it's basically a big cluster or supercomputer doing really big calculations. And we started in the cloud with high-performance computing, with risk analysis, with seismic imaging, with autonomous vehicles back when I started at AWS back in 2017. And 3 years ago, I actually started working with the Anthropic team back at the end of 2020. I can't say that I knew what they were doing was generative AI, but I did know that they were building massive compute at scale. And the ability to do that has only really existed for a few years. So this is what you're looking at here is the history of about how long it takes to build a supercomputer. And for the last 30-ish years, it would take 6 to 7 years to build one of these big computers to run simulations. Now, with AI, to run training workloads. And the time to do that with the cloud, as you can see, is reduced drastically over the last 10 years. And the time it takes to build a supercomputer now is basically 0. So you can stand up a supercomputer overnight, and you can go run AI models, and you can do training and inference and all the things that you see and read about in the headlines. But that's just one of the factors. There's another factor that's happening right now, which is the scale at which you can do that is really increasing exponentially. And what you'll see here is some different models. And as you look at the model sizes and parameters as a proxy for model size, you'll see the model sizes are increasing exponentially. And so when you bring these 2 things together, and I'm a little bit of a math geek, so if you'll bear with me for just a second, if in the numerator your capacity for innovation is going to infinity, and in the denominator your time to innovation is going to 0, what that leads to is a really big number. And when you get that really big number, you can start to build brains. And that's what's happening with generative AI. And it's these brains that are going to help us solve some of the world's biggest challenges. There are also some norms that we're starting to question. Let's go to the next slide. One of which is, if I'm a product person by training and by heart, I know many of you in the room are too, and you spend a lot of time building products. And the old adage is that you could build a product good or fast or cheap and good, and you could only pick 2. And I wonder if in this world of generative AI, this old habit might actually die and not be relevant in the new world. And so what we're seeing is companies get stood up overnight, building amazing products, relatively inexpensively, leveraging the power of GenAI, and they're able to do it really, really quickly and really efficiently. And so this is one of the breakthroughs, is that this historical product paradigm, all of us have been trained to believe. I don't know if it's true anymore, and it's a really amazing time. Okay. The other question I get asked is, what's the most important AI model? My answer to that with Kate on the stage is Anthropic, of course. But what I would say is a good friend of mine is Matt McElwain. He leads and is the managing director for Madrona Ventures. And it's been a really amazing time in the market with all of the researchers coming out of OpenAI, coming out of Google Brain. And with my GTM hat on, I continue to see companies struggle with building products that are relevant to customers and continuing to remember to work backward from customers and the problems that customers are trying to solve. And so my answer and Matt's answer to what the most important AI model is it's the business model. And for the customers in the room who are AI consumers, maybe as opposed to AI producers, I would say the most important application for AI for you is one that unlocks customer value and value for your business. And so we just need to continue to stay focused on that. And Kate, why don't I welcome you up to the stage? Thank you for joining us. Kate from Anthropic. All right. Kate, you don't need an introduction. Anthropic probably doesn't need an introduction, but I'd love for you to open up and tell us a little bit about what you're working on at Anthropic.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to this. Thank you so much for inviting me on stage, and huge thanks to NASDAQ. What an incredible venue. This is awesome. I'm Kate. I lead our sales and partnerships teams at Anthropic, which means that I get to hear from customers all day, every day about what they're thinking when it comes to generative AI, and excited to share a little bit of that with you. It sounds like many of you probably know who Anthropic is, but we were really founded as a research firm that's very focused on safety. And so we've evolved a little bit. We've brought products to market. I hope you have tried our Claude 3 models that came out in March. We're really proud of what we've built, and we're especially proud that we're pushing the frontier on safety research.
Amazing. Okay, well, I know the program officially had me asking you a boring question about how you think about security and data privacy, and those things are important, and we'll get to it. But we were having a good time backstage talking about some of the headline-ish type things. And so maybe just for fun and for the audience's amusement, I will ask you about your point of view and Anthropic's point of view on AI as an existential threat to humanity.
It's always fun when you walk into a room and someone's like, so I'm just going to ask you about existential threats to humanity. Is that cool? Like, I said this to John earlier. I listened to a podcast this morning, and if you are interested in true experts talking about what existential threats could look like, Lex Fridman and Roman Yampolsky spent 2 hours talking about this over the weekend, and I would highly recommend that. Our own founding team has also published quite a bit of fantastic research on what the risks could be. I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing about it. So you talked about how cheap it is and how easy it is to build a supercomputer. And something that Dario, our CEO, wrote the seminal paper on was scaling laws. The idea that model returns in terms of intelligence and capabilities, we don't see diminishing returns in terms of putting money and putting compute into these models. We haven't seen them yet. So these models are pretty powerful today. We expect them to be very powerful tomorrow, and then especially powerful in a couple of years. And so we're doing quite a bit of research to do a couple of different things. One, we have an interpretability team, and that's to look inside the models and figure out what's actually happening as these models become even more intelligent and even more agentic. And then two, we're actually investing quite a bit in steerability. Can you actually steer the model and make sure that the models aren't doing something that you really don't want to happen, and that we can avoid those existential risks? We published a responsible scaling policy. Again, some extra homework for all of you if you're interested. This responsible scaling policy basically is a promise to the world. As we release more and more capable models, it's our promise for what we're going to do in terms of safety controls as we release different models that reach different levels of capacity.
Yeah, and it is a real concern. And I do want to ask about security and data privacy. And you and I have been in a lot of customer meetings and worked together a lot on what the message is there and how important security is as part of our DNA. For the audience members in the room who are thinking about data privacy and security, maybe lean into that a little bit too.
So existential risk is kind of always the first question, and then you get to today and what the models are capable of now. And it's like, and what are you going to do with my data? And the short thing that I want everyone in this room to take away is we do not train the models on customer data. We've invested an enormous amount in security and data privacy at Anthropic. And honestly, the number one thing we've done is partner with AWS. So we host our models on Amazon Bedrock and an Amazon SageMaker. And that means that you can access our models inside of the cloud provider and the cloud relationships that you've already trusted for a long time.
Yeah, amazing.
Well, I want to ask you a little bit more, too. You talked a little bit about trends that you've seen over time. And a lot of people talk about the generative AI wave in terms of the early internet or the start of cloud computing. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the similarities you've seen in those waves?
Yes, and by the way, it's a very nice way of asking me how old I am, too, by the way. So I started in Silicon Valley back in 1997, which it doesn't feel that long ago, but it sure sounds like a long time ago when the words come out of my mouth. Back before the bust and in the heyday, and there are a lot of similarities, and it's really amazing. The democratization of access to information was really incredible back then, and having started in Silicon Valley in 1997, this is, by the way, I love being in New York. I love New York. I love the startup ecosystem has just come so far, even over the last 5 years. So thank you to Lux and A16Z and everyone who's making that happen. I remember what a tragedy it felt like that probably half the capital in the world at the time was getting deployed in a 25 square mile area, and the odds that that capital would go to the person who had the capability to cure cancer was probably pretty low. And for me, generative AI is just an incredible democratization of access to really powerful tooling and technology. And in fact, it might be the third, if I had talked about the first two levers, it might be the third lever as to why this is we're seeing the explosion it is, because I didn't talk to my parents that much about network and data centers. I talk to my parents about generative AI all the time, and it's pervasive and in the public consciousness. So I do think making these tools available to everyone inexpensively at scale, and anyone around the world can open a laptop and access Claude and access AWS and all the tools that come with the security built in is just it's just an amazing point in time for us, and all of us, by the way, should feel a real privilege to be here at this point in history. We worked a lot of long hours back in 97, 98, where all of us are working long hours now. I don't remember the long hours, I just remember the impact that we all had, and so it's an exciting time.
Let's hope we say that, looking back in 10
Yes,
years,
I'm
too.
sure we will say that.
So I know from talking to you over the past several months that many of your customer conversations now are all about generative AI. From the seat you're in, having built these relationships over time for a long time, what do you see as kind of the current state of the AI market today?
Yeah, well, it feels like we compressed the last 18 months, 10 years worth of time in the last 18 months. The release of ChatGPT was really an incredible moment in time. It was, it's one of those days I think most of us will remember in our history. And if 2023 for customers and for a lot of you in this room was a year of experimentation and looking through proof of concepts and experimenting in sandboxes, 2024 is really the year of how do I get these things into production in a way that creates value for me, for my company, for customers. And so we are seeing a lot of emphasis on narrowing down, instead of the shotgun approach to testing generative AI, hey, how do I iterate from 50 use cases in terms of hypothesis down to 2 or 3 that we really want to start going on? And so that's probably the biggest thing that I'm seeing happen right now is customers getting really, really focused, including prioritization of the things that they're working on.
I love that.
Okay, I have one for you, and I want to talk a little bit more about customers and use cases.
Awesome.
We have spent a lot of time going to market together over the last year. Curious as to where you see some of the most impactful use cases and some of the things that are getting early traction.
I get this question all the time, and it's really funny. But when I get it, before I do that, who in this room uses generative AI regularly at work? We're at Tech Week in New York, so I'd hope this would be a lot of people, but that's a good sign. So hopefully this is pretty familiar to you, but there are kind of 3 big buckets that we see in terms of where we're seeing the most energy and the most investment from companies. They all sound boring, and they're actually insanely powerful. The first is content, and content summarization and content understanding. I'll personally say I use Claude every time I go into any meeting. I will download reports about a company that we're about to meet. I'll download transcripts from interviews, even videos, charts, et cetera, and I'll put it all into Claude and just say, how do you think this meeting is going to go? Here's the context for it. And generally, Claude is actually quite good at predicting what's about to happen in that meeting. It's fantastic. We all show up better if we're preparing better. We've known that for a long time, and this is just a tool to help. We're in New York, so there are a lot of analysts, a lot of financial services company. The idea of taking a mass amount of content, digesting it quickly, and getting to the so what quickly is really resonant for a lot of companies that we talk to here in New York City. The second is coding. I'm sure you've heard this too. There are kind of two big things with coding that we're seeing in terms of patterns. The first is just straight up coding assistance. The models can see what you're starting to type and actually just write the code for you. We're seeing that some developers say they're between 40 and 60% more effective in any given day. And the second is actually the models. We are working with some companies to fine-tune models and using some of our newly released tool use functionality to actually auto-upgrade old code. And this is something that anyone who is a developer in the room will know. Upgrading your old code is a real pain, a real time suck, and doesn't actually drive a lot to customer value, but it's a must-do. So the more you can take that sort of thing off your plate, it's really helpful. You're nodding, you're hearing this.
Yeah,
too.
well, it's interesting. So those of us who have been in infrastructure for a long time, by the way, I'm really good at layer 1 to 6. Don't ask me to talk about layer 7. But everyone thought historically that the mainframes would be the last thing to ever move from on-prem. And the two biggest barriers to that were maybe some legacy code and code transformation. But there's a lot of really valuable data that you really want to run GenAI with. And so a lot of the initiatives that we have seen customers have flipped, and mainframe modernization and moving that to the cloud is a top priority now, because that's where the gold is, where all the data is. So maybe just in terms of that, for customers that maybe one of those use cases doesn't resonate with, do you have any mental models or frameworks to how to think about the attributes of what a good use case would be?
We do. I would say there are a couple of different versions of early meetings with folks. And one is just straight up brainstorming sessions. I think you referenced it a few minutes ago. Sometimes companies come to you with 50 use cases, totally ready to deploy. And other times, customers sit and say, where do I start? How do I even think about this? And what I like to think about is sort of a pretty basic 2x2, as boring as it sounds, where you think on one axis, is this going to be customer-facing or is this going to be internal? And on the other, am I seeking to generate revenue from whatever I'm doing, or am I seeking to save cost? And actually, when you start to frame it that way, you can actually bucket a whole bunch of different use cases in that 2x2, and then be very realistic about the amount of investment you're willing to make in an endeavor with generative AI. Some of this is quite expensive. So a cost-saving project that's internal only, you're hearing this from a lot of companies. They're taking a look at how much they actually saved and how much they spent trying to save it, and they're realizing that the ROI isn't quite there. But then you think about external-facing revenue-generating use cases, and people get a lot more excited and put a lot more energy behind it. It's not to say you shouldn't do things in all buckets. It's just to be realistic about the expectations you have.
Yeah, that's good. OK, so let's name some names. Can you talk about some customer examples?
Absolutely. I think Pfizer's in the room. I'm not going to make you stand up, but if you are in the room, I will say you're my personal favorite use case. Pfizer is actually taking patient information, running lab result tests against their massive oncology library, and designing custom cancer treatments for patients. And these treatments used to take 3 months to put together, and now they can take a matter of days. And the results so far from the treatments have been even better. So you talked about your pyramid. Can it be better, faster, cheaper? And then you think about how incredible it is. I'm sure we all know someone who would really have valued faster, better cancer treatment.
I love that, by the way. I love that example. And we and I absolutely believe and have conviction that the cure for cancer will come off of a compute cluster out of a cloud. Other customer examples?
It's so inspiring. There are so many. It's so exciting. Another one that we're really excited about is actually NASDAQ yourselves. We're doing a whole bunch of things with NASDAQ now. Many of them are still in kind of testing phase, but this is a perfect example of us getting in a room together and thinking, what can we do with customer support? What can we do with coding? What can we do with actual customer-facing products? That's really exciting. And then a third is there are a bunch of hedge funds that we're actually working with here in New York. I figured I'd pick a couple of New York examples. Jane Street is one of them. And we're working with Jane Street, again, on both sides of the house, the external facing and the internal facing. Jane Street, we're working with them to upgrade a lot of code, something we just talked about, and then also working with them to develop proprietary models to actually help inform trading decisions. And like I said, there are a number of different investment firms that are looking at similar use cases. It's pretty exciting.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. I think we're a little bit low on time, so I'm actually just going to kind of jump and say, what are some of the things that you see for customers brought to life and how we're working together?
Yeah, that's great. So, and I'll keep we have plenty of time. We're really focused on customer choice at AWS and Amazon. That won't be a surprise to anyone in the room who works with us. And so that's really important. Customer choice for us is about a lot of things, from the bottom of the stack and custom silicon up to and through the middle layer all the way up to the application layer. But customer choice, and choice in particular with generative AI, isn't just about having lots of things. It's also about completeness of choice. And that's where our partnership really comes in. And completeness of choice can be across our first-party services at AWS, across our third-party partner services like Anthropic, which is an incredibly strategic partner for us in allowing us to move really fast together, and open source as well. And so they're all, working backward from customers and the problems they're trying to solve is really important. We do get a lot of customers who have run experimentation over the last 12 months, and they come to us and say, okay, we're ready to go, let's put it in production. And we start asking lots of questions like, have you thought about security? And what does this workflow look like? And it turns out it's really hard, almost impossible, to bolt on security as an afterthought.
Yeah.
And so thinking about enterprise production, scale grade builds of these from the start as you enter the sandbox, I think is really important for customers.
I couldn't agree more. It's one of the most powerful things about being able to show up with customers together. I said this earlier, but you've had this, in many cases, long relationships built on trust. And then we bring this brand new technology that can feel a little scary to folks, and bringing it together has been really wonderful.
Good. Okay. What's coming next? Give us your lens into the future and help the teams here understand where you're going.
I'm a firm believer in those scaling laws. So the models are getting smarter, and they're getting smarter faster. I don't think any of you are strangers to the idea that new models are coming out all the time, and the jump in capability in every new release is pretty remarkable. Then there are two other things that I think are really interesting. One is tool use and agentic behavior. We just GA'd our tool use last week. This is the idea that the models themselves can not only spin up other models to go do work on their behalf. So our largest, most intelligent model is called Opus. We have multiple different use cases with customers where one Opus model is calling 15 Haiku models, the small, fast ones, to go work in parallel at the same time, bring results back, and the big model digests it and produces a result. Now, all of those models can actually call APIs themselves. So you can start to just imagine what your companies are going to be able to do when these models are really agentic. We're very excited about that, and we're working closely with Bedrock in particular to develop some of these tools out and to be able to measure exactly what's happening. And then speaking of measuring what's happening, I mentioned earlier, investing quite a bit in interpretability research. And what that actually means for us is the ability to look inside a model and understand the decisions that it made and what actually happened inside it. And then, ideally, be able to steer the model. So if you are a brand and you only want the model to say certain things, or you only want the model to act in certain ways, you're going to be able to actually build that into the DNA of the model itself. And we're really, really excited about where that research can go from a commercial perspective.
Awesome.
What about you?
Yeah, should we wrap up?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. I'm just, number one, really incredibly thankful and grateful for the partnership, so thank you.
Thank you.
It's been really an amazing journey together. I also am, with my AWS hat on, but just really with my human hat on, excited for the democratization and access to this technology and all the amazing change that's coming. And thank you to all of you in the room who are participating. There was a big startup event yesterday. A lot of companies are just doing really amazing things, and it's a really hard problem when you've had a way of doing things for a long time, and you now see a technology that can help you do something in 2 days instead of 2 years. It's really scary, but it's a huge opportunity, and we're here to help, and Kate's here to help, so please reach out to us. And look, the last thing I'd say is just thank you all for coming out and taking the time. And a lot of what you all know you will get out of this is working with each other and talking to each other about how you're solving those hard problems. And we're here to help. So thank you, Kate. Everyone,
Thank you,
Kate
John.
Jensen, Anthropic.
John Jones, AWS.
That's it. Where's Noi? Noi, back over to you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, John and Kate, for the insightful perspective. And Kate and Anthropic team, we are grateful for the partnership. Next, we have an exciting panel, Navigating the New Era of AI. I would say these companies that we're going to feature on stage are kind of like navigating the AI era pretty well. So I think it would be a perfect discussion. And I would like to welcome to stage A16Z partner Guido Appenzeller to moderate the panel, and to join him on stage, Amit Jain, co-founder and CEO of Luma AI, Ido Liberty, co-founder and CEO of Pinecone, and Marjorie Jainovich, US General Manager at Mistral. Let's welcome them to stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony.
All right, fantastic. So super excited to be here today. This is an incredible time in AI, right? We're in the very early stages of one of these big super cycles where things are moving quickly, things are confusing. So I recently talked to an engineering organization, a large enterprise, and the board wanted to give them a mandate that 30% of their engineers should work on AI projects. I'm glad they were able to negotiate that out, but I think it shows you how much pressure there is on all of us to really figure out what to do with this revolution that we're in right now, right? We're basically going from a world where the way we build software is changing, right? We build software on compute, network, storage. That was sort of the classic trifecta of foundational infrastructure technologies. And we're moving to a world where it's going to be compute, network, storage, and model. And what this means and how we implement it, we're figuring out, we're trying to navigate it. And I'm super excited to have, I think, 3 companies here that really provide incredible critical foundation components for this new software ecosystem. And let me kick this off by just introducing our panelists and let them say a few words about their respective companies. And so let me start with you, Amit. So Amit, you're co-founder at Luma before you were at Apple and invented some of the technologies that go into these devices, and I think also the Apple Vision Pro, one of the foremost experts, I think, on AI and vision. And so first of all, how much can you tell us about Luma? Because you haven't actually launched yet, is that correct?
Yeah, we're not fully out yet. But I can tell you that we are working on very, very large-scale visual models, especially video models. And the idea is to be able to simulate the world. That's the technical goal. And we can talk more about what our actual goals are. But yeah, that's what we're doing.
Fantastic. No, it's a super exciting company. I can't wait for the launch and to see your actual product. Next, Marjorie, she's the general manager for United States for Mistral. I think most people here probably have heard of Mistral. It's one of the most exciting large language models that's out there today. Previously, you worked for SuccessFactors, I believe, and for MongoDB in sales leadership roles, and then were Chief Revenue Officer at Foursquare, and most recently, remind me. Oh, at HackerOne, that's correct, yes, in the security space. So what is Mistral doing?
Yeah, so what is Mistral doing? So very nice to meet everybody. We are offering large language models to the world with a mission to really democratize generative AI. Open source and open weight is the core of what we do, with a focus on portability, customization, and cost and efficiency at inference. I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that in a moment.
Definitely. I think that's something we're all interested in. Yeah. And last but not least, we have Ido Liberty, CEO of Pinecone. Pinecone is, I think, the most widely used vector database today. So before Pinecone, you were at AWS, worked on some of their leading edge technologies, SageMaker, a couple of others there. And you have how many research publications total, peer-reviewed?
70 something.
Oh, that's amazing. What is Pinecone doing in a nutshell?
So Pinecone is really, we think about that as the knowledge layer for language models or foundational models in general. They're used both in language and images and many other domains. In fact, we see that really the domain of search and data information retrieval is merging with AI, and the ability to really bring those two together helps you both truly ground your information, build applications that you can trust with your own data, but still leverage the full power and potential of these foundational models. And so, kind of getting the database to speak the same language as the model required a very specialized piece of infrastructure that is Pinecone.
That's amazing. I think vector databases have really become a key part of this sort of new stack that you use for AI. I think as you blogged recently, right? The new AI stack. So the stack is changing. It feels like when I'm working with large amounts of data, almost everything is changing. Tell us more how to think about this. Like, what is the new stack looking like? What does it mean for an enterprise or large SaaS company if they want to implement AI?
So yeah, the stack is completely different. I mean, this is, you started with saying, hey, it's network and compute and storage. That's still there. That's not changing. But there's a layer above it of AI infrastructure that is specialized for what people are trying to do. Training for large language models, vector databases, eval frameworks, ways to curate data, labeling, and so on. There are all these very, very specialized tasks, and I've been in AI before that, big data and ML and all the other names for it, long enough that we kind of needed to build everything from scratch. And I think a lot of the executives that I meet they're in this like really anxious mode right now, whereas like, hey, the expectations of me are here because I need to launch something that blows people's socks off. But I have no talent, or not no talent, but I don't have enough talent in my team to go and like execute on 7,000 different things. And what's happened it's very recent, in the last year or two or three, is that layer above, including vector databases and training frameworks and so on, have become mature enough that now you can go and build on top of that. And we see now companies getting from almost zero to something very impressive fairly quickly in a matter of months, sometimes with teams as small as like 5 to 10. So I think that's the biggest change that's happened fairly recently.
I think it's true. We're starting to see more and more applications going to production, and that raises a lot of challenges. So Marjorie, from your perspective, is it fair to say one of maybe the biggest differentiator of Mistral is the openness? Is that true?
It is true that there's more, but also I think we need to define what open means.
Please, go for it.
Yes. The way we look at openness is twofold. There's open source on one hand, and then open weight on the other hand. To start with open source first, we definitely believe that this technology is too important to be kept in the hands of a very few. And we want to make sure that a community of developers can definitely test it, use it. I think it's going to drive innovation. It's also probably improving the model. If there's, I think, 9 million downloads of Mistral today. So there's really the appetite to help the world do the right thing with that technology. So that's the open source side of things. And then the open weight side of things is more around, even for models that may be not open source, we want to be able, for our customers, to be able to customize, tailor, being able to fine-tune the models to their specific needs and their specific use cases. So being able to look under the hood is really important. And to go with that, not only being able to deploy everywhere, but also deploying on your own instances so that you can start leveraging very sensitive data to build your specialized use cases, all the way to leveraging virtual private cloud and Bedrock as an example. So the openness is very much to drive for innovation, drive for customization to make those models your specialized models.
So in the future, can I have a model that's fine-tuned on my personal email so it can write emails
on
in
your
my style?
Maybe.
Well, it would be amazing.
You must have a lot going on in your emails. Yes.
We got a lot of training data, that's for sure.
We can work on that if you want. No training needed.
Oh, you do with RAG. Okay, I like this.
I have a few GPUs you can borrow.
There we go. I'll take you up on that offer, all three of you. So you haven't launched yet, right? So can't talk about your product quite yet. Nevertheless, can you give the audience here maybe a sneak preview just to think about the video space? And I think it's fine to talk about that you're in the video space, right? So what's happening with AI video models at the moment? Are we just one step away from the GPT moment where I can type in a short prompt at, I have a Spielberg movie, waiting for me a couple of seconds later?
Yeah, interesting. So video, the demand for video is voracious, first of all. This is how people prefer to communicate now. This is how people entertain themselves.
My kids certainly do.
Right. And video is also a very powerful medium for a lot of work. Imagine being able to, see designing your house, being able to see prototypes of something that hasn't been built yet, but how would that look like? So the way to think about video models is not that they're generating frames. Video models are actually world simulators.
Yep.
You want to be able to see what you're thinking about. And that's, I think, the problem that we want to solve. But if you look at across the board right now, most everyone who's thinking about the video model, they're thinking about it in a very constrained way. They're thinking about it for TikTok videos. They're thinking about it for making movies, which I think are insanely valuable use cases. But it goes much, much further than that. This also actually goes into how you build them. So most everyone we see across the board, the older generation of video models, they're like translators. They take in words and they, word by word, translate it into pixels, moving pixels, or whatever you want to call it. The problem with that is if you remember the old Google Translate, where before the LLMs happened, it would take your words and it will translate to another language word by word. It won't make much sense, but it will kind of communicate. That's kind of where we are at the moment with video. What we need to do is build models that understand our world, that understands actions and consequences. If I drop something, it will fall down and it will bounce up, not just as memory, but actually understand that. Then we can make things that are entertaining. Then we can make things that are funny or scary, but also useful. So that's the approach we are taking, and that's actually a very different way of building them. They start to look a lot more like LLMs than they do video models today. So I hope that helps, but happy to clarify.
Totally. Let me actually ask one follow-up question here. So part of video models, one of the big problems with it is, you have a camera, it looks forward, it pans to the right, it pans to the left, and now may have a completely different scene, right? But everything is consistent, so for a pure 2D model, this might be accessible. Do we need a real world model behind this, where we model something in 3D and sort of your computer first comes up with a hypothesis how the entire world looks like, or can we resolve this in 2D? I mean, I think this is still an open question. Is that fair, or do you have a strong opinion there?
I don't know if you're familiar with the Bitter Lesson.
Yes, I am.
Okay. So we call ourselves the Bitter Lesson Company. And to those who don't know, Bitter Lesson is an essay from Rick Sutton from 2017. And the gist of it is, in the last 70 years of AI and ML, or whatever it was called back then, research, the singular lesson is general methods that are able to apply and consume all the data available and all the compute available are the only ones that work. So in this scenario, to answer your question, I think we need to be basically design architectures and systems that can take in voracious amounts of data. And I don't mean 100 terabytes, 200 terabytes, which is kind of where LLMs stop. 100 terabytes is our evaluation set. We measure it in tens of petabytes, which I'm sure AWS really likes. But that's where it starts. So we are able to show our model a lot of the world. And in that process, by scaling it that far out, it learns the idea of what kids learn when they're in crib about object permanence. If it disappeared, they don't start crying very soon when they grow up. That is what we teach our models. And for that, you need to build a truly video model. It cannot be, as the current generation models are from many companies, they're image animators. They take an image, and you tell it, now make it jump. But it has no idea what is actually happening, right? But if you build truly video models that are able to, that have seen consequences of actions, and that have seen if the camera pans and comes back, it doesn't actually change. Now, internally, the final thought there is internally the representation, what the model comes up with, it is not actually 2D, right? It is something we don't completely understand what that looks like, but it's a richer representation.
Guys, so you're busy saying leave that to the model to learn the internal representation. Just throw more GPUs at it. I'm sure Amazon's going to like that as well here, right? And good things will happen. So, Ido, for working with language, there's some similar choices, right? I can, if I want to take my own data and incorporate it in an app that uses LLMs, right? I can do this by fine-tuning my model. I can do this with RAG, right? I can do this with larger context windows. How should I think about this? What are the pros and cons, or what are the right methods for each of those scenarios?
Yeah. So maybe but connecting to where we started before about giving these AI applications the most amount, all the data that they need, and sort of what companies are trying to do, which is build applications with your own data, right? You have your own documents, processes, your own customers, your own transcribed meetings, whatever it is, your own emails. You would like to take all of that and somehow cram it into the model and say, please know all of this, right? And then let's chat, right? That is incredibly complicated today, and that's what you're asking. How do I do that? How do I tell the model, go read all of that and tell me when you've memorized all of it, and then let's talk after, right? And so you raised, one of them is this like context window or context mechanism, right? Where you basically, with the question, you send the data, basically. That doesn't work. Only works if you ask a question about one document or 3 documents, but that runs its course pretty quickly at some point. Like, you're not going to send 10,000 documents on every query. That's
not my entire email.
That's not, exactly. You're not going to be like uploading your entire inbox of 20 years on every query, right? That's not going to work. Fine-tuning actually helps and works pretty well. The problem is that you have very little control over when it hallucinates, when it does not. You have very little ability to know when it hallucinates or not. And it's actually quite complicated to do well, okay? And complicated, it's simpler than it was 5 years ago. There are way more tools, and companies offer these, a lot of services and software and so on. Not simple. I've worked with a lot of companies who try to do it. It's a big effort, and there's a lot of expertise involved. RAG is retrieval augmented generation, is a method in which people use something like usually a vector database, and I'm happy to say that that's usually Pinecone, to retrieve the right information on demand. Basically, when you ask a question or when you're interacting with a chat, you're saying to the vector database, hey, go fetch relevant information, write the right context for this conversation so that I can produce an answer. And so that's what people do, right? And that ends up being incredibly efficient. And more than that, you have now full control over your own data. So now, because you own the database, your index on Pinecone, you can add data, and the LLM knows it literally like 5 seconds later, right? Or you can delete data. You can be GDPR compliant. You can be, you can really manage that in a much more fine-tuned way, pun unintended. And that's it. Those are the 3 methods. Each applies in different scenarios, and I'm sure many of you here tried at least one or more of those.
And I think, one thing that I've seen just using it myself is that also the ability to essentially see what were the sources that my LLM
100%.
Was using to come to a particular conclusion is super
100%.
Helpful, right?
Exactly.
Cite your sources, LLM, basically, so I can get a lot more confidence in.
Right, and that, 100%. It's incredibly important, especially for applications that require some level of responsibility or accountability from the company that owns them, right? We have a lot of customers that do legal discovery, right? They want to know, hey, where did this factoid come from? I want to, it's so important. I need to click this and go see the source and really verify that this came from somewhere that I condone, right? Or medical, or a lot of visual stuff. And so there's, it becomes when maybe zoom out one click and just say, when we build those applications in the real world, we need to really care about some pedestrian things like security and privacy and compliance and so on. And we discover, like in many other technologies, that the impossible is possible, but easy things are still hard. So I think, again, this is the tension between what companies see as possible and what their reality, and there's a big gap. That's one of those sources of tension today, and why companies say, hey, do I need 30% of my workforce to work on AI? Because they see a lot of gaps.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, in my experience, specifically in talking to the enterprise, often compliance, legal security is one of the biggest blocking factors for adopting AI-based applications. And having the ability to point back to the source and understand why a certain answer was generated, I think is something that's hugely beneficial.
I call those LLM jitters.
Yeah, there we go.
Like a lot of people get the LLM jitters. They want, it's like, it's cool, but can I ship this? I'm not sure.
So, compliance has barricaded themselves in their office and are saying no to everything.
We don't want to see this.
We've been there. Marjorie, how does it look from your side? If you're talking to an enterprise, I'm sure you've heard concerns around, how can I make this compliant and secure and fulfill my legal requirements? How from your side, how can you help enterprises do that?
Yeah. I think that there's two dimensions to this also. I think on one hand, there's a need for control. And then on the other hand, there's a need for ease of deployment. And then on top of that, you start adding requirements for security, compliance, and governance. So I think on the first hand, if our customers are already in the cloud, working with Amazon Bedrock, it's been quite awesome to fast track some of the security requirements that you wouldn't have been able to meet otherwise. So I think that's a first removal of barrier of entry from that point of view. The other side also, if customers are leveraging our APIs to consume our models, we actually don't want to see the data. So from an input perspective, we are not going to see the data. From an output perspective, we're not going to use the data from a post-training mechanism perspective. So that's another way. And then when we start going into the theme of compliance and regulation and governance, this is where the flexibility and the ability to really tune and tailor the models to the requirements are really helping enterprises to understand that there's a way they can control the output of the model as much as possible. So our models, for example, are going to give them access to fine-tuning the editorial, modifying the guardrails, and all of that helps us very much on the control and the governance side of things. So I found that with all of this, adoption is actually happening quite faster than some of the technology revolutions we've seen over the past 10 to 15 years.
I think it's very true, yeah. The uptake on AI technologies, if we look at some of the curves, is absolutely amazing. I mean, I think everybody followed NVIDIA and their earnings, right, with like a 265% or so year-over-year revenue growth, right? This might be the highest growth we'll see in our lifetime of a company in a single year, right? So it's truly an exceptional time here, I think, for all of us. So Amit, let me sort of play back a little bit the question I asked you previously, and then I think we got sidetracked into hallucination consistency. But if you would have gone to a monk in the Middle Ages and would have told them, you know what, the number one author in the time that I'm from wrote a 7-series book series, about a wizard at a wizarding school all by herself. Probably the monk would have said, well, that's completely crazy. I mean, look, to write a book, you need to have people that make the parchment for you and people that mix the inks. And, it takes a whole team to pull something off like writing a book, right? But technology has made a lot of the sort of execution tasks easier. So somebody with the necessary creativity can do this all by themselves at this point. How far are we away from that for movies? Like, is there a point in time where somebody who has the creativity, who has the visual ideas, where I can just sit down and create a full feature film all by themselves? Is this a year out? Will this never happen? So, if you have to speculate, what's your take here?
If we have anything to say about it, it's not that far out, right? I think that the thing that is changing, and in your example too, they had to go make the parchment paper. They had to assemble it all together. Then they start writing with ink, all those things. Things were done in bits. sorry, things were done in atoms, right? You had to orchestrate the atoms,
Yeah.
which is tough. Then we had the desktop publishing revolution, and suddenly all of that could happen on a computer. And now we have really powerful LLMs that also help with the thinking of it,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Which is extremely powerful. So this is a general trend. When things move from atoms to bits, a lot more people can do it. They do very new things with it,
Yeah.
and it becomes a global thing, right? So we have seen this with video already with YouTube. In 2005, suddenly everybody thought, like, oh, these home cameras, home videos will upload this, and now YouTube is like, this is the thing. Like, I basically don't have cable, right? It's either YouTube or Netflix, and that's crazy. So that's the distribution part. How do we make it? It's still currently like big studios or a few YouTubers who have
right.
cracked like how do you actually make
A lot of
these
physical
things?
stuff. Yeah.
Right. There's actually an insidious problem there. It's not just that they can only make it. It's just only the stories they want to tell get told, right? Only the stories that are applicable to their audience or make money get told. We're seeing now with like TikTok and things like that, there's actually way more stories on the planet. But what would happen if like those people had access to tools, but not just tools, ability to do things in bits, what currently takes teams and a huge number of atoms, I think that would be very huge. From feature-length movie to today, right? Like that's a very interesting way to think about it. But I think we'll have notches, right? We'll come to a place where like by the way, first of all, I don't believe everybody wants to be a storyteller, right? Everybody doesn't want to be at least a movie maker, right? But they have a story to tell, or they have a product to pitch, or they have some idea to share. Those things will be shared much better than they're done today. They would be shared much more clearly. People would have a very clear idea of what you're talking about, what I'm talking about, because we can see that in front of us. That will happen very rapidly, within a year or something like that. Then basically, we need to make a leap in the intelligence of these models. Like, these should not just stay video models. That's why Luma is not just a video model company, Luma is a multimodal company. Because if they're just video models, even if they produce an hour-long, 2-hour-long things, they will be not interesting. They won't like what they produce is going to be like drab, as we're seeing in LLMs too. Intelligent LLMs produce engaging content, and dumb LLMs produce like fluff and garbage. So that's going to happen here as well. So we have to climb that ladder of intelligence and that curve of scale before we can actually produce. It's not about the length, it's about the intelligence and how good these models can be. So that's our focus, whether that comes from architecture side, data side, how we're building the company, all of those things. And I think that's where we're going.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Let me do a quick last round of questions here. So, Madhuri, you mentioned you're working with AWS. Mm-hmm. You want to go slightly more specific of what the offering is that you currently joined the go-to-market with?
I mean, with AWS, it's really basically distributing our models on AWS GPUs with the strength of AWS in the backend. So that's on the one hand for really any type of use cases. For use cases that are also on-prem, where virtual private cloud is needed, we also have a partnership with AWS Bedrock. So customers that are both either in very regulated spaces that needs really to control and own their own models on their own premise. The relationship is helping us to foster a great relationship in financial services, for example. And for all other, across the entire pyramids, really SMBs, mid-market that are trying to adopt LLMs in the cloud, we work very closely with the team on that. So,
fantastic.
Yeah.
Ido, how about you?
We are, so we have been the #1 most procured service on the AWS marketplace for 2 months straight now.
Very nice.
Which, as somebody who built AWS services, that's surreal. To begin with, that was very impressive. I wish our revenue was as big as the number 2, 3, and 4. That shows the level of experimentation versus, enthusiasm versus volume of workloads in production. But, that ecosystem, literally hundreds of thousands of engineers and scientists and innovators building our product is now going to AWS and coming back, and this becomes an ecosystem of innovation that they can go and use Mistral's models in Bedrock, which is also powered by Pinecone as well, all the search stuff, and other products that, that they come in and they also use storage and network and compute. I mean, this is, AI is not a model. It's not just a vector database. It's not just that. Like, you need to build an application around it. And being in the ecosystem and giving people an array of tools and have AWS invest in AI so much, I think is hugely beneficial to everyone.
Perfect. And Ahmed, for you, it's too early to have a product on AWS, is that right?
Yeah.
But you're working with them
Yeah.
nevertheless, correct?
Yeah. We're early in our partnership with AWS, but to make these models possible, actually, we couldn't train these models before H100s. Just to tell you how on the bleeding edge we are.
Yeah.
And we need to string together these immense number of GPUs into one gigantic machine. And we learned from a lot of experimentation that having a GPU and having a training cluster are two entirely separate things. So yeah, we were very, very excited to work with AWS because we've been using HyperPod, their SageMaker service for this, and it's been very stable. It has allowed us to actually get to a place where we are, anyway, I won't tell you when we are releasing.
All right.
The single metric is hey, if you let it run overnight, does the training crash, right?
Yeah.
Now our trainings don't crash overnight.
Fantastic. Yeah. Super. With that, I think we're out of time. Thank you very much. I think it was an exciting panel.
What a great panel. Thank you, Guido, for the fantastic moderation and the three panelists from Luma, Pinecone, Mistral, Ami, Dido, and Marjorie. Clearly, so much of innovation is happening right now, I think, only from these three fantastic companies on stages. That's mind-blowing. And that's it. I really hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thank you to our speakers, again to the sponsor, Oric and KPMG, and hope to see you again. Enjoy Tech Week.